All right. All right. So let's talk about VO2 max and this case study. Again, have dozens of these, have used all types of machines for when it comes to VO2 max. And biggest priority when it comes to actually doing this type of metrics using a ventilatory like based device is understanding what each thing means so that you could just use it and formulate your own process and your own protocols. Um, it's actually simple when we go into the weeds of it. So in this case, we actually used a machine on this test called Pinoy. Truthfully, it's not a bad unit. Just breaks down a lot. There's other equipments like Core, Cosmed, Pavo, VO2 Master, a lot of them. The biggest thing when it comes to using this test, you want to make sure that you get one that has both oxygen and carbon sensors. So you can actually see the exchange happen and really pinpoint it, as to opposed to some machines that only use, so to say, they only use the O2 and breath to find ventilatory threshold, which is not a bad marker, but it's not ideal to understand what's happening with the person's metabolism, especially when someone has a disease or something like that. But there are different metrics to use for different formulas to figure out what is the best plan. There's dozens and dozens of ways to measure someone's VO2, and there's dozens of ways to program for someone's capabilities and what they're able to do now. So this is what it looks like, an actual test, something that we want to digest. As I said, right now, you guys are looking at oxygen and CO2. We're going to take off the CO2 because we don't need it right now. And we're going to put in heart rate. Well, we'll come back to that. Right now, this person's absolute VO2, which means the amount of oxygen they actually uptake regardless of weight, height, gender, anything like that. Max is pretty much the plateau that we want to look for here. So you see how this guy constantly kind of like goes back into this line? So max is going to be considered this plateau. 40, yeah, so we're going to run it off to about 40, 40, 50. Okay, that's a good average. That's a plateau there that he's got going on. Or we could just go straight across the line and say 4,000. So this is the absolute amount of oxygen this person takes. That is their max. It is a plateau they're able to sustain at the highest level of the stage. Versus peak, which is that one time. They just touch it up for one time at that longest peak ever. This is VO2 peak, 4,700. It means like that split second, he got up there for a split second. It's not constant. It's not measurable. The idea with VO2, it's not about VO2. It's about how they get there. And then are they able to sustain that? Because we're never going to program to hit, hey, hit 35 VO2. Hey, hit 40 VO2. It's too much of a variable. Things change. So now we're going to talk about the actual VO2 that most people see, which is incorporating weight. So in this case, this person, big person, his VO2 max is about 40. Okay, which is not bad. I use a spreadsheet to actually take out the average of all this stuff, and we actually extrapolate what is the highest number. So in this case, 40 based on kilograms of his weight. So kilograms is just pounds divided by 2.2. The way that this formula works is that you take absolute and you divide it by kilograms. Basically it. So essentially you get this number, right? VO2 max is going to be heavily based on weight and the amount of oxygen you take in. So if you have a really big person and that person doesn't take in a lot of oxygen, VO2 max is going to be a piece of shit. If you have a really skinny person and does the same amount of oxygen as that big person, their VO2 is going to be much higher because they have less weight. So it equates to them having more efficiency in using oxygen for energy production. That's the whole goal. Energy production. So now let's really take a look at what's going on with this person. So heart rate. We want to look at where the heart rates are. Again, VO2 is not the big component of it. It doesn't matter. What I look into is a couple things. What is your active resting heart rate? Meaning when they actually came in. So this person's at 32. So that's not right. Machine warmed up a little bit. I'm going to give them about 90 as the lowest point. Yeah, about 95. 95, that's the lowest rate. And then you'll see it kind of like progress. So the maximum heart rate is 183. So we have the lowest and we have the highest, right? He is 20-something years old. This is around his predicted age heart rate, which most people use is 220 minus their age. Gives them their heart rate, their max predicted heart rate. Sometimes they'll use the Carvolin formula, which is 220 minus their age. Take away the resting heart rate, multiply it. Well, take away the resting heart rate, multiply it by a percentage. You get that. Or the other one that you're not looking for percentages will just be 220 minus your age and then your heart rate reserve. But regardless. So again, 183 is the actual heart rate. There's a standard deviation of 24 beats within the max heart rate. So even if you get someone that's 20 years old and their max predicted is 200, that person could be 24 beats under that or 24 beats above that. You don't know unless if you do a maximal test to actually figure it out. Again, maximal test should be someone that's healthy, no contraindications, nothing really is going to hurt them. If not, you do need to have someone that's a professional there with you, a medical professional, just in case if something were to happen or, again, liability purposes, right? So we want to make sure that this is a healthy person that's not going through anything that they can't do and they're permitted to do. So again, this is kind of pointless. I get to see that they have a good rhythm going on, meaning with intensity, their heart rate goes up. Great. This person is not conditioned. Right away, I could tell you. So when they go from one to the other, if it's more of a lower slope, that means that they're more conditioned, meaning like they don't jump that high and they could keep going. That means that they're more conditioned. That's if you want to use heart rate. If you don't have anything else, I'm just going to show you how I do it if I have no other numbers. I could tell you where the intensities are based on those slopes and where he should be hit, and then divide the peak of the slope by the low end of that slope. So pretty much I could take this peak and here and see if there's a huge correlation between that, like if it's, let's say, 10 beats versus this guy and this guy is 15 beats. I already know that there's a metabolic change here. So I could figure out where the zones are just based on this. Super complicated math, but that's one way. What we really want to use is something called RER. So respiratory exchange ratio. And we also want to take a look at how carbs and fats really transition from one to another. So right here, I'll kind of like narrow it down for you. But you see how it starts to cross over? And then there's a major shift here. See how there's a mid slope, which is a pretty big slope in between that routine. So see how it kind of shifts already, like it starts to go into this? This is his metabolic efficiency, ME. Okay. Sometimes it's closely related to ventilatory threshold 1 and aerobic threshold 1. Very close. It's also very close to the end of zone 2. We use this number because, again, this is the bang for your buck. You're not really going to burn a lot of, you're not going to suffocate at this level or anything below it. So it's enough of a challenging pace, and you should see some adaptations here, because a lot of times for non-athletic individuals, you could get them down here lower than that, and they're going to get better cardiovascular, pulmonary, everything's going to change. Everything's going to improve. But when you have someone more athletic, the low end stuff is not going to cut it. They won't get enough of a stimuli to adapt to it. So at the lowest end, when it comes to recovery paces, we want to at least get somewhere where it's challenging enough where they could stay there forever, right? So this is where they could stay there for hours and hours and not have a problem with it. About 138 is this person's number, okay? So if you're trying to lose weight and you just don't want to do massive runs, or I mean like very fast-paced stuff or high-intensity stuff, or just a recovery stay around here because you're going to burn the most calories calorically at this number, both fats and carbohydrates. And the reason being, as you start going up, your RER starts to go up, which means that buffering, that pain, that fatigue starts to go up higher and higher. So that's the first number we want to see, which is 136. Lowest I want someone to be at when it comes to training. Now, see how this changes? This is how metabolism works. Low intensity, you use more fats. Higher intensity, you start getting into carbohydrates. But you end up using both relatively throughout the whole thing. That's normal. You use both energy systems. It's not one or the other. And you start burning more calories as you go further up. Right, see how fat kind of just like stays the same a little bit? That's how metabolism works. You just start shifting to a higher chart of the pie, though, a higher piece of the pie. But it's still there. I just don't know why people do this stuff. So, and we'll touch more on it, but again, 138 is where I want them to be the low end. 136, my apologies. Yeah, 138. Now, moving on, let's take this away, and let's do RER. So RER is essentially when there's more CO2 versus oxygen. It's the ratio between those two numbers. It's respiratory exchange ratio or respiratory exchange quotient, depending what your school of learning is. The idea is that your lactic threshold, when you get closer to burning more carbohydrates, you get closer into your anaerobic state, which means you're going to have more byproduct. Lactic acid, pyruvate, more hydrogen ions, more acidic stuff, more carbon chains are released. So the ratio flips. When there's too much of it and you just can't breathe enough to buffer all that out. And that's where we start saying, hey, this is where your lactic threshold is. This is where your threshold is to maintain those things that will fatigue you and hurt while you're running and feel like you're gassing out. So see how it goes into 1? You can't use this one as the main turnover because shortly after he comes down. So it means he started breathing heavier and he started buffering a lot better. Body started warming up. But you see now how it gets into 1 again, and then it starts to shift higher and higher as it goes. So we would consider this as the threshold, 160, just about, right? So heart rate wise, his lactic threshold, I would keep him at 160. All of this changes as he gets more and more metabolically adapted to the activity they're doing, as he loses weight, as he's getting better. This person, if you've seen the DEXA portion of the case study, he's a big boy. So if he loses weight, he'll be much better. Okay. So 2 numbers now. 136, 160. All this in between is zone 3. So zone 2, zone 3, and then now zone 4, 5, right? There's zone AB, 4AB, 5AB. 4 just means like you're right at the line. Before the line is A, B is at the line. 5, I don't know why this is a little redundant. 5 is the line. 5A is the line. 5B is right after the line. And then 6 is maximum effort. So in this case, like, I could keep him from not burning out if he stays under 160. Interval days, I would want them to get close to 160. Or if I'm trying to build the anaerobic power he has, I could get him at 163, 164 for a split second, and then just come back down to 136. And I could keep doing this. And I could progress this person from a very mild position to a high position. So meaning if they're just starting to do intervals, I'll have them just do 2 of these. 2 hit 162, hit 1 hit 63, 30 seconds, 2 times within the workout. Give yourself a 5-minute break and let's repeat. As they get more athletic or there's a specific goal, we could start shifting that differently. We could change the recovery to active ratio 3-1, 2-1, 1-1. If they have a specific sport, like let's say boxing, we could do 3-1, right? 3 heavy, close to lactic threshold, maintain it, and then 1 down. Or we could do a 3-1-1. So 3 meaning like get into your zone 3-4, just under it. 1 minute at above zone 5, and then back to recovery for another minute, and then repeat the thing. So I could play with numbers all day, and now we have numerical data, which is a heart rate. The idea is why heart rate is so important is because you can take this you can take it anywhere to any environment, and you can find a correlating intensity and where you stand. So if you live in a cold environment, it's going to be much, much different when you go from outside training to inside training, because now you don't have the environmental influence. Same thing when you go from inside training to a very hot place, like where I live, Miami. Super nice to run inside. Once you run outside, be prepared for the heat and humidity. Your heart rate's going to spike up just because of that. So it's differences in environment, and it's a good way to know like how intense are you really hitting and how to modulate your pace based on this, even if it's indoor versus outdoors. So those are the numbers we're looking at. And then, of course, the maximum number, so that you don't try and exceed that or get too close to that. It wouldn't be any purpose to stay there. Now, other things that we could look at. So here's where I'll touch on diet a little bit. I'm not a dietitian, but I'm going to explain this. So again, I'm going to show you this fat versus carbohydrates. When someone is more adapted to fats, this doesn't change. What does change is how long do they sustain this green dark line to keep going. They'll sustain it a little bit longer at a higher rate, and then eventually they'll get into carbohydrates solely. But that's always been the strategy. The strategy has always been like, let's try and utilize fats at higher intensities as best we can. Keep them as a reserve. Strategically, I could run faster if I could stay within this crosshair. That's the idea. I've adapted to do that. People that are not efficient in mobilizing fats, you'll see the opposite. They'll mobilize more carbohydrates that get shortened down. You'll see this guy take a bigger swing, and the X will occur faster here. That's the main difference between someone that's more metabolically inclined to using fats better versus someone who's not. That's where this whole keto premise performance came from. It was to try and manipulate this bar graph. That was the goal. Now, someone that's diabetic, you'll see the same thing as someone that's been doing keto for a long time. And it has to do because they don't have a proficiency using carbohydrates. Type 1, type 2, they don't have a proficiency because they don't produce as much insulin. So you'll see the same trend, right? It also depends when they take their insulin, when they take their medications, when all these things occur, this is going to change big time. While I'm on that topic, anytime someone takes a certain medication for a long period of time, this thing is going to shift. When you take performance-enhancing drugs, this is going to be different. When you caffeinate versus not caffeinate, this is going to look different. When you eat versus don't eat, it's going to be different. So a lot of things happen based on the individual's habits, training, and abilities. Why it's important to do this type of test. Because we could really narrow down specifically what's going on for the person. And you can see if there is a metabolic deficiency or function or something. This is also the type of machine that you will use for resting metabolic rates, where you get to see someone's caloric intake at rest and actually prescribe something for them, or at least give them an idea. And I'll touch on that, but it's the same custom. I just have you sit down, you breathe through a tube, and I tell you how many calories you burn in 10 minutes. That's it. See, this guy actually shows calories. See? Total calories burnt during that time. But let's go back to this here. Now, another thing that we'll see is when someone's more aerobically trained, this line takes longer to go higher. The slope increase is different. Versus someone who is, well, essentially when they hit that number, when they hit the RER for runners who are very good and trained, once they hit it, they kind of just like crash down. They crash. So you get the opposite for someone that's actually trained more anaerobically. You'll get someone that just takes a while. They'll hit the one that I mentioned, and then they'll stay there for a while. They'll stay there for 1 or 2 minutes, and then they'll start feeling the burn and they'll drop. So I could tell you what type of athlete this person is, what type of routine they've had, what type of diet they've had, just from looking at all these numbers. And we can modify things based on this in programming. That's why this is so cool, and this is why it's awesome. I like it. Other things that most practitioners won't really touch on, which is not easy to do, we could actually look at this person's breathing patterns. We have ventilatory threshold, and then we have, vital tidal, and then ventilatory exhalation, right? Ventilatory tidal, right? And then we have other markers that we could use too. So we have inspiration of oxygen, CO2, because we do rebreathe a little bit of CO2, expiration of O2. Again, we expel a little bit of oxygen, we expel a little bit of CO2. We get to see all these numbers. Now, I only usually dive into this when it comes to pulmonary cases. We can look at it. We can see how this person breathed during all the stage, whether they are taking in sufficient oxygen or not. The only one that I'm upset that you don't really see is this guy right here. But this one has to do with the environmental influences. It's just, you're not going to see it. So, very cool stuff. Very detailed information. When you do a pulmonary test, you'll get all these numbers and a better chart than this, right? But that's a cool thing about using this machine. I could tell you a lot about your body just from here. Now, let's dive into what we're actually going to look at when it comes to numbers. So again, this is not him. This is someone else. Okay? So this person, when they did their test, you can see that I didn't do this test. But still, I'm going to tell you what they wrote here. My biggest component is, again, they did their big 3 numbers. Okay? So anaerobic, zone 3, zone 2, and then recovery heart rates. Right? Now, this is a different one. It's fine. We can still go over through this. But this person, again, big boy, didn't breathe in a lot of oxygen, so the relative VO2 ended up being this. Okay. METs. This is another key component. So when it comes to METs, this tells us a lot about the person and what's going on. So this, we actually use it as an equivalence to what they can perform, right? And this one, 9 METs, it's equivalent to running, right? If you do 9 METs, you're able to run. That is his peak. That means that for a split second, he was able to run. He was able to do a VO2 max, so he was able to sustain close to running. That's a problem, Because if the maximum effort you could do is run, this is 6 miles per hour, give or take, by the way. Sorry, about 8 miles per hour, give or take. That's a problem. It means that jogging is tough for him. It's about 6 mets to jog. And that's half of his capacity already. Walking is 3 mets. So 3 mets is a quarter of his maximal capacity. So he's already using a third of what he can perform to just walk. This is why it's important. So if someone comes in, this is an average VO2, by the way, for his age and everything. If someone comes in with less than 30, it's an indication that they have problems walking often, that they could walk a few blocks and then they're gassed out. And they have 20 or close to 20. That's even worse, because that means that they could walk a block and they're fatigued out. At rest, we use about 10 mets at rest. 3.5 VO2, sleeping, doing nothing, just being alive. So that's scary. Yeah, that's scary. We use 1 met for just being alive. I apologize for that. 10 VO2. So yeah, that's an issue. That's an issue. But yeah, we could use this for activity. So like vacuum cleaning takes about 2.5 mets. Going up and down the stairs takes about 3.5, 3.2 to 3.5 depending on the weights. So we could really use this, and it's tied to a component of activity. But again, 1 met is equivalent to 3.5. So doing nothing, it's just 3.5 VO2. So imagine someone that could only do 20. It's a big chunk, just being alive. But that's why we use this, because we can use this for programming as well, not just the relative VO2 and all that fun stuff, and how you could dictate if someone's actually healthy or not. Then the last thing over here in this little corner, this is your resting metabolic rate, if we did a resting metabolic rate. So in this case, they left this out. It's okay. We just want to see what you are burning at rest. So RER or REQ, 0.7 and less is usually meaning that you're burning fats at rest, which is what's normal. If we start to see something like this at rest, well, that's not normal. It means that you're either burning some proteins or something's going on that you're catabolicing your state at rest. This is at rest. It shouldn't be that at rest. It wouldn't make any sense. And if it's higher than that, usually means you're diabetic. So like if you start getting close to 9 and 1, then that's a diabetes issue. You're not burning the carbs that you have in your system. You have a backlog and there's something going on. It's hyperglycemia, right? So we wouldn't want to check your glucose at the time. So knowing this, we could tell you what's going on with your body at the time being at rest. Okay, total daily energy expenditure. There's a reason why we show all of these. Because we don't necessarily just do one thing versus the other. So if this person were to do nothing all day, just go to the bathroom, sit, lay down, they're going to burn about 2,000 calories. That's because they're so big and they still have a lot of muscle mass from the DEXA we did. So if they're trying to lose weight, they could simply just be on their deficit on that, doing nothing. Will it take longer? Will they get efficient anywhere else? Will they get better pulmonary cardio movement, everything? No. But they'll lose weight if they're consistent. On the days that they are doing something like office work and they're actually walking and things like that, well, they're going to be closer to 2,500. This is assuming that you're hitting at least 5,000, 7,000 steps a day. These now get into more activity. So moderate, 30 minutes of activity twice a week, including the 10,000 steps that you're supposed to take. This is what it would look like a day. Okay. 45 minutes, moderate intensity workout. You're doing your 10,000 steps a day. This is what it will look like for that day that you work out. More than an hour, very vigorous activity. This is what it will look like on that day for that particular person. And then if you're doing a physical job, you're training 2 times a day, heavy intensities, this is what it would look like. So the reason why we do this is because not every day are you going to have the same routine. You're going to have rest days, so we're going to implore you to go down here. Or depending on the dietitian or the specialist that you speak with, they will probably try and keep you at this low end and add activity, like more progressive activity. Or they'll try and keep you, they could try and play it off like at 2,250 calories. And then they'll just have you add activity by walking, moving, things like that, and then really change your diet. Not a lot of times will some people go extreme and do 1,000 calories of a difference. Can they? Maybe. It depends on the professional that you're working with and how committed someone is. It's just the likelihood of eating disorders, and things like that will happen if you push too much to the extreme. And then your performance will drop when it comes to activity. So it's a balancing act, and it's super important when you do these type of tests. So yeah, this is what a VO2 test looks like. I didn't do this test. There's a few numbers that are missing, a few things that are missing on this screen. But for the most part, these are the numbers that we will look at all across the board for every type of VO2 machine out there when someone does it for you versus AI now that's doing a lot of the work. They miss out on a few components, especially when it comes to people that are taking medications, peptides, hormones, constantly training a different way. Things get skewed a lot. But yeah, this is a VO2 test.